Hi, Kimberly here from the Expert Hostess. Today we are going to be showing you guys how to make the quintessential fall dessert, which is cranberry apple purses with a caramel sauce. Like the name suggests, it has apples and cranberries, there's some brown sugar, cinnamon, caramel. Really, it is the essence of fall. This recipe actually comes from the Executive Pastry Chef at Deer Valley Resort. Her name is Letty Flatt, and she's amazing with pastries, so let's get started. One of the first things you're going to need to have and have prepared is your phyllo dough. Phyllo can be found in the frozen section of the grocery store, generally around the fruits, but right next to the puff pastry. And it needs to be in your refrigerator overnight in order to thaw properly. You can thaw it beforehand, about a couple of hours before you start working with it, but I find it's best to just remember to put it in the refrigerator overnight. So we'll just mention that first off. But we're going to come back to the phyllo later, and we're going to get started on our apples. You need 6 golden delicious apples, or about 3 pounds. And then you're going to take them and you're just going to peel them to start out with. I like to use a vegetable peeler. Some people prefer knives, but whatever you prefer to get your apples peeled quickly and efficiently will work just fine. I've gone ahead and prepped most of the apples, but we'll show you how to finish up with this last apple. Sometimes Golden Delicious apples are nice and yellow like this one is, and sometimes they're a little more green. Either one will work for this recipe. So don't worry if you go to your grocery store and you see a green Golden Delicious apple. It'll work just fine. Now you can either use an apple core, which I like to use just because it makes the first cut really easy, but you can just use a knife if you don't have one. And this cut it into 8 slices for me. And basically, the rule of thumb, you want about each slice to be about, you're going to cut it lengthwise, and you want each slice to be about 1/4 of an inch thick. So because I have 8 slices, I'm going to cut each of my slices into 3, and that'll get me there. It'll get me about to 1/4 of an inch each. So for each half of an apple, you'll want about 12 slices. So however you do that, if you do it with an apple core, it's pretty easy because you can just remember to make 3 cuts per slice of apple. This is a very impressive dessert to have at a small dinner party or a gathering. It's delicious and it always impresses. So what we're going to do here is we're going to heat up a pan, and if you've got a large saute pan, that would work best. Today I'm working with a saucepan. You're going to take about 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter and just put it right in your pan, and you're going to want that to melt first before you start adding any of the other ingredients. So once your 2 tablespoons of butter starts to melt, you're going to want to add in your apples. And then you're going to add in about 1/2 cup of cranberries. I always like to do just a little bit more than that. On ingredients that I like, I find I tend to add just a little bit more. There's 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. I put probably about 3/4 of a teaspoon just because I really like cinnamon. Then about 1/2 cup of brown sugar to give it some sweetness. And again, it's really that taste of fall. And then a pinch of nutmeg. And I love to use fresh nutmeg, so I'm just going to grind some fresh nutmeg over. You can use non-fresh ground nutmeg as well and just put in a little pinch, but I really like the flavor of fresh, so that's what I tend to use. And then just go ahead and give it a stir to kind of coat. You want all of the apples coated with cinnamon and with the brown sugar, so they all get that delicious flavor. And you want to get them a little bit of butter too. I have served this for larger dinner parties. It takes a little bit more prep time, so I find and you have to have enough room. You make them ahead of time to store them in the refrigerator, so they need to be baked and served while your guests are there. So I find it's usually better to do it for a smaller dinner party. Anywhere from 6 to 12 people would be my recommendation, although I have done it for larger parties, so you could. We're just going to let them become soft. You want them to become so that they're tender. Fork tender is just fine. They're gonna then be baked in a little pastry shell in the oven. If you have a larger saute pan, the nice thing about that is it will cook down a little bit faster. When you have, if you're in a saucepan like I am today, it'll take a little bit more time for all of the apples to get a little bit softer. And you don't want the apples to be too mushy, but you certainly don't want them to be too crispy either. You can see some of my apples had broken apart, so some are a little bit smaller, and that's okay. You don't want them all to be small. You want a really good distribution, but if some break up or become smaller, it's okay. You can, if you don't like dried cranberries, you can substitute the cranberries with cherries or any other dried fruit that you really love, and it would be just fine. You'll notice as the apples become softer, they start, and the juices start coming out, they start to decrease in volume. So when you started with a larger amount of apples, it's going to really work its way down and become smaller and more compact. So once your apples and cranberries have finished cooking, you put them aside in a strainer to be able to strain out all the juices, and you'll just want those to cool. Now that we have the apple and cranberry mixture cooling, we're going to come over and work on the purse part of the pastry. Now that involves our phyllo dough that we talked about earlier. Remember, you have to have it properly defrosted before you use it. Phyllo dough can be kind of intimidating to people to use. It can dry out very quickly, and it can rip really easily because there are very thin sheets of dough. So we're going to give you a few tricks and tips on using phyllo dough so that you're very comfortable using it and you know how to make sure it doesn't dry out. The first thing to do is you always want to leave it in its package and in the refrigerator until you're ready to use it. And then once you're ready to use it, you can take it out of its package. And you'll see it's wrapped in plastic. You'll want to kind of keep it in the plastic because what you're going to do is in between pulling out each sheet, because most of the recipes you use with phyllo dough require you to put out a sheet at a time, you're going to get a damp but a wrung out, make sure to wring out all of the water in it, dishcloth. You don't want it too wet in case it does have contact with the phyllo dough, because then it will just turn it into basically shreds of dough. And then you'll just, in between, you'll just cover the dough with the cloth. But again, you'll want plastic over it. If you can't have its own plastic sheeting over it, you can just grab a piece of plastic wrap, throw it on top, and then put the towel on top of that. So let's get started. We're going to open up our phyllo dough and remove one sheet. And again, they are very thin, paper thin sheet of phyllo dough. And then immediately we'll want to take the rest of this dough, refold the plastic over it, and put our dish towel on top. So we're going to lay out this sheet of dough completely flat. And then I've got some melted butter here. We're just going to take the melted butter and brush butter. You'll especially want to get those edges because they dry out the fastest. If it rips, that's okay because you're going to be putting more dough on top. So it's all right if it rips, although you try to be as gentle as possible to make it not rip. But don't get frustrated. If it does rip, you can solve it with another piece of phyllo. We're going to do, for these purses, we're going to do about 5 sheets of phyllo on top of each other. But again, if you have one that's really ripped or you feel like you need to put another 1 or 2 on top, you can. And it will work just fine. So I'm opening it up and I'm taking out another piece of phyllo dough. And then I'm going to place that on top of our last dough. And then I'm going to quickly roll that up and cover it with our cloth. And this is what is intimidating to people about phyllo dough, is you do have to really take care of it. But it can create some really impressive, really fun desserts and appetizers. And so you really shouldn't be intimidated to use it. Just get those edges first. And then just brush a little in the middle till it's well covered. And then we go for another piece. So this is our third layer of phyllo dough. They stick a little, it's okay, just put it in. Drop this one on top of the other two and then fold up the dough in its plastic and put our towel on top. You'll notice because they are so thin, the butter starts seeping through a little into the next sheet. That's okay. I'm still going to come across and I'm still going to put a little more butter on. It's not a fat-free dessert, that's for sure, but it is beautiful. And tastes delicious, of course. All right, we're going to go for our fourth layer here. And you'll notice that the phyllo dough that I'm pulling out, it hasn't dried out. That towel is keeping it moist, making it so that it's not difficult to work with, not tricky. And by keeping it in its plastic every time I roll it back up, I'm ensuring that the wet towel does not make our phyllo dough wet in any way, shape, or form, because then it will be even trickier to work with. This one didn't sit completely flat when I put it down, but it should be just fine. That was 4 layers. We're going to put on our 5th right now, our final layer. And then we'll show you how easy it is to assemble these purses. Now this one is already a little bit ripped, but again, that's just fine. You've got several layers of dough, and I'm just going to kind of assemble it back together so that there's not a rip. Wrap that up again. Always remember to put your towel on top. You want to keep it so that it doesn't dry out and doesn't get frustrating. It really is easy once you get the handle of it. Okay, so this sheet, now it's got 5 sheets of pastry on it. We are going to cut it into 4ths. So we're going to come about halfway lengthwise. We're going to cut it, and then we're going to come halfway the other direction. So we make 4 rectangles. And then we are going to take our strained cranberry apple mixture. And you want about 1/3 cup of mixture on each rectangle. I'm just going to take some and place it in the middle. The one thing I wish you could see when these purses come out is I wish you could see the inside before it's opened up, just because it is so pretty and it really does have those fall colors. So we've got those together, and then what you're going to do is you're going to take one rectangle and you're just going to start matching the corners up to each other. Basically what you're doing in this part is you're forming the little purse. So you want everything to kind of stick together. So you take all the corners, fill in all of the gaps, you make a little twist at the top, and you make a little packet. So let's try that again with this one. Take the 2 opposite corners, that's what I like to do first, and I bring in the other corners, fold in any of the side edges that I can to the best of my ability. It's not always perfect, and that's okay. It'll come out just fine in the end. And you just give it a little twist at the top to hold it together. So we're going to put these directly onto a baking sheet. I have my baking sheet lined with parchment. And then we'll go ahead and make 4 more. Now that we have the cranberry and apple purses formed, or at least a sheet of them formed, what we're going to do is we're going to just drizzle a little melted butter on top. We just want it to brown up nicely as we cook it. We've preheated our oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and we will put these in for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then I'm telling you, you are going to impress your guests with this one. You will want to serve these warm too, so if you get to this point before you put on the butter, you can just wrap it with a sheet of plastic wrap and put it in your refrigerator if you make it a little bit earlier in the day, so that when it comes about time for dessert, you're going to take it out, just brush it with a little melted butter like we just did, and then put it in your oven. Again, that's 400 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes. You just want them to be nicely golden brown. You can see it's starting to change color. It's getting a little darker now from that bright light. It really is pretty easy to make a caramel sauce. This isn't going to be the thick kind of caramel sauce that you see on, from an ice cream topping. That's looking really beautiful, starting to really turn a little more golden. This would be way too early though to take it off. It won't have as much flavor in it. When it does turn amber color, we're going to add in a little bit of cream. And when we add in the cream, our mixture may seize up. It may turn hard, but don't worry. Once you put it back over the heat, it's going to melt again nicely. And here we go. We've got kind of this deep color right here. Mixture's really reacting to the cold, but as it gets warm again, it's gonna go ahead and melt down. I'm gonna put it back over the heat, and we're gonna stir in the remaining cream slowly. And that is looking really beautiful. What we're going to do now is we're just going to keep stirring this, and we're going to let this come to a boil. There we go. Got a good boil there. Add in our juices. Try and scrape out some of that cinnamon, some of those delicious flavors we added in to our purses, the filling of our purses. There we go. We're going to just stir this for another minute or two to let it kind of thicken up a bit. Take that off. We have a really pretty caramel sauce. So now that we have all of the parts of the purses done, we're just going to go ahead and assemble them and put them on a plate. Now we have, as part of our decor, we're using leaf plates, so I'm going to put one on there. But I'll also put one on a normal white plate so you can kind of see how that would look. So to assemble, you just put your purse onto your plate. If you would like, you can put them a little bit of powdered sugar. Sprinkle a little powdered sugar on them. And then just take your caramel sauce and drizzle it over and around wherever you want on your purse. And you can put as much or as little as you want on it. Now, the purses may open up a little bit, as you can see during cooking. That's totally fine. But if you want to add a little more color to your plate, you can add in, just put some more cranberries around there, just to add a little bit more color if you'd like, or you can just leave it without. And there you have your cranberry apple purses with caramel sauce. And once again, this is Kimberly from the Expert Hostess, where we make you look like the Expert Hostess.